We are.
Cool. Yeah. So everyone, welcome to our masterclass series. My name is Zach O'Farrell. I'm the Director of Education Programs at the Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance. I just want to take a second just to make sure everyone has their microphone off so that you don't have to, we don't hear everything that's going on in your home lives, happy though they may be. And yeah, I just wanted to say what's up. Welcome everyone. This class we have the fantastic Brian Davis and Astrid Asmundson, who are the team that's been putting together the virtual Birdland series for I think this coming Sunday is week 30. So we've been Brian has been on it from the beginning. Astrid joined him a few months ago, and they've just been doing some incredible work. So I'm going to remove my spotlight and let Brian and Astrid take it away. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Zach. Nice to see you all. Thanks all for dropping in. So just in case you don't know what we're doing here today, this is going to be all about starting to put together virtual performance videos. And the sort of thing that we've been doing is something like this. Let me share my screen. Oh, Zach, can you switch on screen sharing for us?
Do you need to ask me to do it?
Host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay, let me enable attendee screen sharing if I can. It usually has. Uh-oh. Why is it not?
Next time, can you buy nuts, right? Can you buy what? Yesterday the nuts finished.
It usually asks. It usually shows you asking to use it to do it.
Yeah, and it's not on here.
Did you buy?
Oh, I'm now the co-host. Maybe that lets me do it.
Yeah, I'm gonna make you.
Yeah, now I'm good. Thank you. Make Astrid the co-host as well. Then we can do it.
If you the nuts, buy the one that you eat. Don't go and buy the one that you don't eat. After that, people throw it away.
All right.
Okay, good. So, as I was saying, this is the kind of thing that we're looking at coming up right here. And it's videos of this sort, which is what we've been doing for Virtual Birdland. You should hopefully, please indicate with a thumbs up or an okay sign or something like that you can actually hear this. You should be able to. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we're looking at, just in case you weren't sure what this was all about. What we're talking about is home recorded musicians all playing to a click track and then put together in a kind of an on-screen grid to make a virtual band. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. This is something we've been doing over here. Our first episode of Virtual Birdland was April the 19th. I looked it up just before we came on. And so that means that this coming Sunday, we've done one every Sunday apart from one Sunday, which was Notes for Votes a couple of weeks ago. But other than that, this is the 31st consecutive Sunday coming up this week that there's been some kind of a show at 8:30 on the Alger channels. And a little background about me, I'm actually just a member of the band, the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra. I play in the trumpet section. Usually I play third trumpet. Once in a while I play lead trumpet. But on the side, when I'm not a musician, I have been a computer guy for a long time now. And I've had a lot of jobs related to IT and computers over the past, I don't know, 15 years or so. And in particular, the first 6 years, I've lived in New York for 11 years now. And the first 6 years I was here, I was actually a web developer by trade. I wasn't even playing for the first few years. So I've had various computer jobs, and I've also run a trumpet lessons YouTube channel for a few years now, knocking on 3 years, I think. And so that was my introduction to editing videos and just getting very simple talking head videos, things like we're doing right now, working and getting those together. And so when Arturo O'Farrell suggested that we should do some kind of a virtual recording and maybe make it a thing and do it, we thought we might maybe do it once, and now this is coming up to the 30th time. We, said about that. I was like, sure, I know a little about Final Cut Pro. I know a little about video editing. I'm sure we can do something. At that point, I had never edited a virtual performance video in my life. Not one, never done it. And so all of a sudden we started recording the stuff, and it all arrived on about Thursday. And they turned around to me and said, right, good, you've got everything now. We're doing it. It's on Sunday. Go. Have fun. And I spent the most stressful 50 hours of my life between about Thursday afternoon and Sunday night when the show went live, getting this stuff all together and just literally figuring it out as I go. Okay. So at this point, like I say, this coming week is the 30th show. I checked in our tracking spreadsheet just before we came on here. In the course of that, we have presented 108 individual pieces of music in the course of 29 shows so far. And I've personally edited 75 of those. And that includes not only individual pieces that range anywhere from about 4 minutes up to about 10 minutes or so, but also a selection of suites from the book as well. So some Chico O'Farrell suites, some Arturo O'Farrell suites, different things like that, which are longer form pieces, which are actually 3 or 4 movements in their own right, and usually total about, I think the longest one we did, the Afro-Cuban Jazz Suite, I think that was 23 minutes in total, just in a single piece, all put together. So there's a lot of stuff we've kind of figured out as we've got on with. Now, the co-host today is Astrid Asmundson, and Astrid is a former member of the Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance Fat Cat Youth Program, who we were talking a little about this the other day, and she transferred from a music major to a film major when she was at school. And so it comes at this from being a proper video editor and actually learning something about it ahead of time. So all the stuff I've figured out to do has been by necessity, and as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and I've kind of figured it out as I've gone. I consider myself pretty proficient in Final Cut Pro, which is my editing software of choice at this stage, because I've spent, now you say you've got to spend 10,000 hours doing something to become an expert. Well, I reckon I'm about halfway there in the past 7 months. So it's been a lot of time spent. Yeah, so basically what we've been doing is putting these things together. A little about our process every week is that we have 18 people in the band, unless we have guests, soloists, or anything like that. The typical lineup is an 18-piece big band. That's 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 5 saxes, 5 members of the rhythm section, because obviously it's a Latin big band and we have 2 percussionists in addition to piano, bass, and drums. And what we all do is we decide on the charts, the music gets sent out, And Vince Cherico, our drummer, records first with a click track and lays down the entire arrangement. And then the bass is added on top of that. And then usually some other elements of the rhythm section are added on top of that. And then it goes to the lead horn players and so on down the chain. So over the course of about 5 or 6 days, typically, everybody submits their own audio for that song and video. And we record usually 4 or 5 songs a week. At that point, that stuff all comes to me. And then I make the decision about who's going to edit what. Like I say, Astrid's been on the team now since, what is it, Astrid? About week 10 or something like that? You've been with us since about June sometime, haven't you?
I think around mid-May, late May. Around
Okay, yeah, even earlier than I thought. That's why you've done a third of the stuff at this point. You know, it's so, you know, this is all very much, this was all originally put together just in terms of me going, right, how do I get 18 people on the screen? Well, math tells me that, you know, 3 rows of 6 people ought to be a good thing. And I figured out there was a layout that looked vaguely like the band when you see them on stage at Birdland, which is what we're supposed to be performing instead of. And that's kind of ended up being the thing. And that's what we base it on every week. The original layout came from me literally drawing a grid in Photoshop. Again, I come from a computer background, so putting that together and figuring out how to size things and make it fit. And that has eventually evolved into the clip that I showed you. So I'm interested to know from any of you who are looking in here, what your level of experience with any kind of video editing is. Are you looking at doing this for the very first time? Have you done a little something and you're wondering what it is? By all means, you know, switch your video on and raise your hand or give me a wave or something, and I'll come to each of you if you like, and we can see what's up. We've got a first volunteer. Fred's the first volunteer.
Yes, I've fooled around with iMovie with limited success, but that's the extent of it.
Okay, great.
And I also do audio. I do audio editing in Adobe Audition.
Ah, good. Who's next? Pete. I think you're muted, Pete. I'm not hearing you.
Is that hello?
Yeah, there you are. No, you've gone again. You must have a bad cable. Yeah, it's crackling in and out. Sorry.
Move on to somebody else. Hear me?
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we do that?
I just killed the microphone. So I'm a local music director at a local church, and it's funny because you're the one that I reached out to when this whole thing started. And I didn't have a Mac at all, and you were like, "Get Filmora." That's probably the best one that you could use for PC and not break the bank. And I mean, I pretty much from that first day had to figure out how to create really basic ones that come with Filmora. I mean, didn't know how to do anything at all. I've always been technically inclined, but I never messed around with anything with film and music. So that's pretty much where I am. I am getting a Mac very soon, and hopefully I'll be getting Final Cut Pro myself.
Very cool. Who else? Benedict. You're muted.
Okay, now. Hello.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, hi. So I messed a little bit around with iMovie and Final Cut, but now I got a little iRig and plug it in to my iPhone. So I'm looking into ways to make it more easy, so that I can directly record. Yeah.
Awesome. Nick was raising his hand before.
Hey everyone, yeah, I would say I'm novice level. I probably have experience like making little movies for high school projects. But other than that, nothing music related or serious music related.
Okay, cool. I think Natalie was raising her hand.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
What-
I have pretty much beginner experience. I recently got Final Cut Pro, but my computer is maxed out in terms of like RAM and stuff. So doing any sort of video editing is kind of a headache because it moves so slowly. So yeah.
Sure. Well, we'll go into a couple of things that can help out with that, particularly in Final Cut, because it's a resource hog, or it can be, unless you set it up just right.
Right.
Anybody else? Max?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a little bit on iMovie and I have Final Cut, but I haven't really had the time yet to really dig into it and try to do anything with that. So, just looking to see what you're doing with all the Algis stuff and just kind of observe and maybe try a couple of things out afterwards.
Very cool. Yeah. Any other volunteers? Connie? You're still muted, Connie.
Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, I started out kind of like this whole pandemic as a complete technosar. And I've had some recording projects that I've wound up doing where I've kind of had to learn how to do my own recordings from home, using GarageBand. And then I also teach, besides being a flutist, I teach elementary school band. So I did a project with my students using WeVideo, and there were two projects. I saw what you had done, Brian, and it was really amazing. And I was trying to do something, kind of similar with my students. And WeVideo is real finicky. It's not a pro program or a pro app, so it doesn't really allow you to have to line things up with any degree of accuracy. So
Sure.
for like a small, simple thing, it was okay. But then later on, I did a more involved project, and the audio tracks had to be kind of dumped into GarageBand to line up the audio tracks, and then dumped back onto WeVideo for the video stuff. But it's been a while, and kind of been out of commission for a little while, and kind of looking to get back into it. And this time with a little more education about this, and I'd love to see how how to do this on Final Cut or on a real program.
Okay, very cool. Well, that's what we'll try and get through today. Anybody else? Juanga, is it? Sorry if I'm saying your name wrong.
Yeah, no, you did great.
Thank
Yeah, I have some little experience with Windows program like Movie Maker and Movavi, pretty simple videos. But yeah, I would like to see how you do it, and yeah, try to learn a little bit.
Okay, very cool.
Thank you.
So, right, well, let's crack into this. The reason, apart from the fact that Astrid is the person who helps me out most of all doing these videos, that she's here, is because I've been a Mac user for 15 or so years, and so I use Final Cut, which is Mac-only software. Now, Astrid comes at this from the perspective of using Premiere Pro, which is available for Mac or PC. She happens to be a Mac user, but because of requirements of getting started at school and things like that, they were encouraged to use Premiere Pro instead. It doesn't really matter to an extent which software you use, except for the fact that if you want to do largish ensembles, you get limited very quickly in the split screen capabilities of the cheap or free video editing software that tends to come with your computer, things like Movie Maker on Windows or iMovie on Mac. iMovie in particular, there's a couple hacks you can use, but basically you can't split screen into more than two things. You can either do a direct split screen, or you can do a kind of box in Vision, sort of, like a clip playing in the back of the news or something like that. But you're pretty limited in what you can do there. You can export some stuff and split screen it once and then import it back in and split screen it again, but the quality gets a little rough after doing that a couple of times. Okay, so for what we do in terms of consistently needing to deal with at least 18 musicians, and the most I've done at this stage is 39. We did a massed band with the Aljo and with a high school band, Wagner High School, which is one of the schools that we have a cooperation with for the education program. And yeah, we did a piece together with them, and in total there was 39 people in little boxes on the screen at some points of that. That was an editing headache for a couple of days. I'm not going to deny it. It was that was a lot, but we got it together and we made it work quite nicely. But really, in essence, it doesn't matter. The basic techniques of dealing with this are the same, whichever software you use. Now, the important thing logistically, as far as we're concerned, and in terms of how I deal with this, is that we deal with the audio and the video separately. So even though, everyone sends their videos in and you can, for the most part, hear them playing on them, occasionally not. The piano videos, for instance, Arturo records with an electric piano and it's just in his headphones, and you can, it midis into a really nice piano sound and sounds great on the audio track, but what comes to me in the video is largely silent apart from the hammering of his fingers on the keyboard. So that's always a little entertaining to get synced up and get it lined up, as Astrid will attest. It's that gets a little interesting to deal with, and there's some things like that. But generally, you can hear everybody. But the audio itself, and this is kind of central to the process of doing it, is mixed separately from the video. We have a great audio engineer called Peter Carl, who has been working with us since week 3, I think. And he just does an unbelievable job with the sound of the things. And the reason it sounds good is down to Peter. And obviously the individual musicians for playing well. But, in terms of the overall sound of the thing as you hear it on Sunday nights, that's down to Peter. And the guy's a genius, and I don't know how he does half of what he does. We had a thing with a guest violinist a couple of weeks ago, and she was literally recording on a little Zoom video recorder in the park by the river. And when that video came into me and they said, oh yeah, by the way, could you extract the audio from this, because that's what Peter's going to work with? And I was like, I can hear more people talking and the river going by and traffic in the distance than I can violin. I don't know what we're going to do with this. And we sent it over to Peter. He was like, yeah, I got it. And it sounds beautiful. The work that man does is incredible. Anyway, that's not the point of why we're here. But it is important, the fact that we get a, more or less fully formed audio track to work with. So what we can do from there is take that audio and use it as the basis to sync our individual video clips to make sure that everything lines up properly. Because obviously we're getting clips from people with a variety of different equipment. For the most part, everyone who regularly records with us every week, they have some variety of recording equipment at this stage. They didn't all to begin with. And for several weeks, certain people were literally just recording with GarageBand on their phones, which presents surprisingly good results, actually, if you use like a headset microphone with the wire and the microphone on there, it balances out quite nicely and you get reasonable results. It's quite surprising. But that also means a lot of people video on their cell phones. And so even though we try and standardize the frame rates and things like that to give us the best chance of it being together, you get a huge variety of frame rates these videos come through at. Ostensibly, they're supposed to be 30 frames a second. And some people completely forget to set it up and they'll send me something at 24. Occasionally, people will be recording on a random webcam and it will come through at 12 frames a second. Sometimes, more often than not, a lot of the Samsung phones in particular seem to give either 30.09 frames a second or 29.87 or something like that. And then the people with like kind of DSLR cameras like me, some other members of the band, everything comes through at 29.97. Now, 29.97 is my preferred frame rate to get this all done, because that's your broadcast quality standard for television production in this country. It is that way for a couple of reasons. In particular, basically it's going to be somewhere close to 30 frames a second, because the power system of the US and other connected countries runs on a 60 hertz refresh rate. And so if you video things at either 60 frames a second or a direct fraction of it, like 30 frames a second, for instance, then everything looks pretty good. If you don't, and you use the European rates, which are based off of 50 hertz and therefore 25 frames a second, you'll get a consistent barring up and down the screen, like an old-fashioned TV. It's a very peculiar effect, and it's because you're getting a strobing effect between the way that the lights in your space are pulsing and what the camera is catching. Okay, and so yeah, we're in the US, so we aim to do these things at 29.97, which is as close as your real gear gets to 30 frames a second. But we get a variety, so we have some problems with syncing things up, and 29.97 and 30 frames per second, even though they're close, they're not the same thing. And what we've learned through experience is that if you don't sync them up properly, your videos get out of sync by 1 frame every 33 1/3 seconds. So you have everything synced up nicely, and then all of a sudden you get a minute into the piece and you go, hang on, how come the drums just slightly out? And then a couple of minutes in, you realize that someone's really playing just on the wrong beat, because it's kind of discernible after you get to about a 15th of a second, you can see the fact that it's not in sync. So this is something we have to watch out for. So there's various things we have to deal with for getting this started. Anyway, I do all this stuff in Final Cut. Astrid does it all in Premiere. These things all basically work the same. Now, I've already showed you my screen a little bit. This is what my basic Final Cut Pro timeline looks like when I'm getting onto a piece like this. This is from a couple of weeks ago. This is Ran Can Can from the Tito Puente book that we performed. And as you can see, there's a whole mess of stuff going on right here. What I think we should probably go through is how I put some of this together, and then we'll have Astrid show some of the differences between how that works on Final Cut and Premiere Pro. Between those two editors, you will find a lot of things which are in common with whatever software you may use. Final Cut Pro, of course, is the kind of the big brother of iMovie on the Mac. And in essence, most of the other video softwares that you run into are based on the way that Premiere Pro runs and kind of organizes things. That's been my experience, at least. So, yes, so this is the final thing, and as I played it for you before, and as you can see, there's 18 videos right here, all in a stack. And at times they're all on, and at times different individual ones are on, and different things happen at different points. As we can scroll through it, we can see the way the layouts change. Now, in terms of the process of doing this, it starts from being in this view. And so what I think I'll go through actually is setting one of these up from the get-go, okay? And that'll probably be the best way to go. So let's come over here and let's come to a fresh event in the Final Cut library. Now, I've already got all the media for this imported in a different event, so I'll just drag it onto the timeline. But right now, I'm just going to come up here and prepare a new project. And this is going to be Rancan example 1, as you can see. Now, this gives me my timeline right here. And let me see what I can do. How can I? Oh, that's probably a good place for it. Okay. Don't know if you can see it, but I'm seeing all of you in a little gallery view, and it's in the way of the controls. Let me see what I need to be at. I need to boost this up, so I've got a timeline space down here. Right, the first thing I'm going to do with this I did that so quickly. Let me set this project up again so you can see what the settings are. Let's get rid of that and let's start over. Okay, so I'm going to come up here. I'm going to go to new project and he's out of the way. I'm calling this Rancan example 1. It's in the examples event, and this is going to be a 1080p video. So the resolution of this video clip is going to be 1920 by 1080. And as I say, I'm doing it at 29.97 per second frame rate. Okay, and the rest of the stuff is just basically standard. And so that's where we're going to be. So we say, okay, and we're into this new project. Okay. Now, what I have down here, my first stage, if I come back over here to Rancan, I can find out where all my media is stored. And as you'll see, I've got all the various instruments in their individual clips here. So here's alto 1, here's alto 2, the baritone, so on and so forth. There's all 18 members of the band up there. And the other thing I have over here is the final audio mix. So what I need to do is add all of these to the timeline and start to get this set up. The first thing I'm actually going to do over here is I'm going to come up here to the top left of the screen and come to my titles and generators. And I'm going to come down here. It'll show you in the browser titles. We don't need to see those. What we need are generators, and I'm looking for solids because I need to make a white background that I can switch on and off. So I'm going to come in the generators down to solids. I'm going to grab the whites right here, and I'm going to drag it down into the timeline. Okay. And then with that selected, I'm going to come up to the top right of the screen here to the inspector and look at the parameters of this white background. And it's set by default to the smoky white, and I want it to be bright white instead. So we've got a nice white background there, okay? Right, the next thing I'm gonna add in here, I'm gonna come up back to my media browser. I'm gonna take this audio mix. So we've got a white background down in the main storyline of this video. I'm gonna take the audio mix and I'm gonna drag it right here underneath. Now, obviously, right now, this is a 10-second white background followed by the music just playing all the way through. And so I'm going to zoom the timeline so I can see everything on it by hitting Shift and Z or Z on the keyboard. Now you can see the whole length of that audio clip. And I simply drag out this white background all the way to the length of the audio. And it snaps into place right there. So if I play this back, all we got is the music going. Okay. So far, so good. Right, the next step is to put everything above that white background into the timeline. Now, the order I like to do this in is I start with the bass at the bottom. So here comes the bass. And I'm just going to organize these things in sections. So working from the bottom up, it's always bass, followed by drums. And for this band, I then put the congas, the bongos. No, not the tenor one. That's not what I intended. Bongos, come on. we got the bongos. Next comes the piano. And then we'll get into the saxophones. Good, so we add the baritone saxophone, tenor 2. No, not trumpet 4. This is Zoom lag kicking in and making my screen move slowly. Tenor 1, then we've got to find the altos. No, not trombone 1. Okay, we're getting there. That's your trombones in place. And then trumpet 4, trumpet 3, trumpet 2, and trumpet 1. If trumpet 1 wants to come down in here. Come on, computer. There he is. Right, good. So now, because of these are my videos out of my original timeline, I've already pre-synced these so they just automatically line up on the left and start. And we'll go into that and how I do that in a little while. But in the first instance, I just wanted to show you how this all comes together. Now, for right now, wow, this gets slow when you've got Zoom screen sharing going. We've got to wait just for a second for the... Let me come out of this screen share and go back in because it's almost shut my computer off. Yeah, we're going to go through that again. This stuff gets to be slow pretty quickly. Sorry about that. Right, let's go back into that and see if we can get that going. Right, so right now I've got all of my individual videos in the timeline. Now, the first thing I'm going to need to do is to turn the volume off on all of these. So I will endeavor to make sure proxies are on here. Here we go. Right, it's working up now. Yeah, I want to switch this on. I've got proxies set up. We'll go into that. I want to get this to ease up a little bit and start running a little more smoothly. So these are now proxy versions of these files. What that means is when I've imported them, it's transcoded a version which is a very small file size. So each of these individual videos is probably between 750 megs and 1 gigabyte. Okay. And the proxy version it's put together for me as I've imported them will be about 25 megabytes each. So it's a lot less for the computer to deal with processing. Okay, the first thing I need to do with these, as I say, if I can actually get them to select. Oh, good. There we are, we got one of them. Come here. Wow, this goes slow. This is when you get to learn why people don't live stream these sort of sessions these days. You always record them and play them back afterwards. But we live and learn, we'll get there. Right, that's got the top one selected. Let me select the bottom one as well with a shift and a click. And apparently in about 10 seconds, it will decide to do that.
Brian, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Because your screen share is very small on my screen, are the names of the individual videos carried down when you have into the blue section? So you know what
Yes,
you're dealing with?
absolutely.
Okay. Great.
It's and I've standardized them so it gives the title of the tune followed by the instrument.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, good. I finally got those all selected. And I can now go up to modify and adjust volume if anything will load. And all I'm trying to do is mute these things. Right, let me stop that share and just do it off of the screen share and explain to you what I did rather than showing it, because otherwise we're going to be here all day. Give me 1 second just to do this. Now Final Cut won't even load. Wow. Okay. Right. In Final Cut, in the modify menu, there is an adjust volume setting, which I'm going to set to silence, because when I try and play these clips back, I don't want them to all play their individual audio files back. I just want them just to be in sync with the audio that's further down in the timeline. Good. So, right, well, I just square a couple of things away with this for a second. Astrid, you want to see if you have any better luck screen sharing your Premiere and showing how that similar sort of thing works for you?
Yes, I will give that a shot.
And I'm going to mute myself and quietly curse to myself that Final Cut's working so slowly in the screen share. So over to Astrid.
All right, well, it's good to see everyone here. It sounds to me like a lot of people are interested in Final Cut, but I'm going to go through a little bit about Premiere nonetheless. It's, as Brian said, it's pretty similar in a lot of ways. Let's see if I can share. Can everyone see that? So I set up this sample project here. This is basically what the Premiere layout looks like. Let's see if I can open a sample sequence. So yeah, as you can see, the layout is fairly similar. I've color coded my sections in a way that Brian does as well. So basically, let's see if this works. All right, so typically how I get into this is open a new project over here. And all of these settings are pretty much standard. So you typically just click OK, but since I have something already up, I'm just gonna hit cancel now. And then we're over here in the assembly tab. And I already have all my instruments kind of organized in bins in the mix over here. So in order to start a sequence, I'm going to go over here and click on new sequence, or alternatively hit Command N. I have this custom setup for Virtual Birdland that is essentially the same as the ARRI 1080p setup for 29.97. So we're just going to rename that and then just hit OK. And so here it is. This is with nothing loaded in. Typically what I would do is first drag the mix in, start from there. I do have one video that was not pre-processed downloaded. Let's see if I put that in here already. Just to show you what it looks like getting someone in sync. So just going to make sure that he is at 29.97. We're going to properties over here, right clicking on his icon, And yeah, he's at 29.97. So let's go over to editing. And basically what we do is look for a clap at the beginning, which he did on his bass over here. So I'm just going to basically drag him out into my timeline. And this is where looking at the audio gets really important. So I need to move some things around here. Here we go. Looks like that's where his clap is. So I'm just gonna drag that over. And we're gonna assume this is what he's clapping on. This beat right here. Just drag that a little more. And I'm basically zooming in and out by just hitting plus and minus on the keyboard. And we're gonna unmute that and just see how he sounds with the audio. So that sounds pretty much right to me. And then we're just gonna drag out the rest of his video so that he's starting at the beginning here. And yeah, that's basically how I would go about syncing a clip. But since I have all these pre-synced over here, or pre-processed rather, I'm just gonna delete that and then go through the pre-processed rhythm section. So I'm gonna drag drums out over here. And actually we don't need his audio. So I'm just going to right click, go over to unlink and then just delete his audio. Put him in video one. Well, actually, no, we want a grid first. So I'm gonna go over to grids. And these are all grids that Brian designed. There are a couple that I kind of customized by cropping two different ones together, which I can get into a little bit later. Let's see, the standard grid I like to start with is just the 3x6 black for the full band. Drag that out to the whole length of the piece. I'm going to make sure that's the right frame size. So we're going to scale to frame size. And so for the positioning, I have presets set over here that basically just do all of the, try to search this one up, do all the cropping and the positioning for you, which is a total lifesaver. It's something that I really could have used early on because I was doing everything in a much more arduous way before. So I'm just going to drag over 3x6 drums, and that just automatically puts them over here. And one of the most important traits to have in a preset, and I'll go through how to set up a preset, is the transform quality. So this basically will let me move him around without taking him out of the box, kind of readjust his positioning just by dragging left and right over here. And so how I get that all set up is I'm just going to go ahead and right click, remove attributes. I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to have the effect controls open over here. I'm going to look for crop and then also for transform and just drag them up. And it's important to have transform above crop for a reason that I don't totally understand, but it just, it works. We have them selected. So typically we know that we want his scale to be down at 32. And that just works for these grids. And I understand the positioning, the numbers are totally different on Final Cut, but for whatever reason, the numbers over here, the middle is always going to be 540. The top row is 184. And then the bottom row is 896. So I'm just going to move him over here like that. And the cropping is also always going to add up to 50%. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it here. And a way to check that he is kind of properly lined up in the box is just to drag him down again and see there's a little bit over here. So I'm just going to move him over a little bit more. And that looks good. I'm going to move him back up to 184. And then that's basically how I'd set up the preset, and save that by just right-clicking on this top option here, selecting all. That takes all these attributes and just kind of saves it into one thing like that. So in the future, I can just drag that out and drop that on without having to go through all those steps. And yeah, does that stop me if I'm talking too fast or going through these things in a way that does not totally make sense? That's basically how I'd set drums up. And let me go back to effects. Back to my presets for this grid. All right, so we have drums. I'm going to just go ahead and drag everybody else out now as well. Another way to drag out just video is by clicking this, opening it up over here, and then dragging just this little video icon, because we don't need his audio at this stage. And piano. And yeah, so I basically go through and put all these pre-saved presets for their positioning in piano, bass. We're going to just drag on. And that sets it up just kind of like that. And then we're going to take a look over here. Everyone looks okay, I think. Otherwise, if someone did not look okay, I just go over back to effect controls, down to transform, and just kind of move them over in the positioning tab. And so that's basically the setup for the rhythm section. I could maybe, I don't know if Brian, if you want to jump in with something now. I can open up.
I can do by all means. I actually just turned my Final Cut off to give the computer a rest for a minute because it was freaking out. So I think probably, as you can see, basically dragging these things down and getting them set works in largely the same way in both applications. Similarly, I've got presets set for these because otherwise I've just got a stack of individual videos. Where's my screen share gone? Sorry. Back. There it is. Okay. So yeah, similarly, I've got the full band in there, and I've also got presets set for these, which the original ones I did, as Astrid said, I built that grid in Photoshop and used to use that as the base of it. These days, and my original presets were the Outro virtual ones over here, which were done in much the same way, where I could, where I went through that process of positioning and cropping. We figured out that for that grid, they need to be 32% tall. And so I can take, for instance, the trumpet one preset from over here and just drop that in there, and he's in the right place now. And then you just see the next one down in the chain. But in actual fact, what I've done subsequently is built plugins for all of this, since I use it all the time. There's a complementary application to Final Cut Pro called Apple Motion, which is for building motion graphics and layouts and things like that. And let's just make sure we've got Seneca zeroed here. Why is he? It's reset it. Okay, good. And so what I've built is presets for all of these grids. So this is the 6x3 grid that we're going for right here. And so I'm going to simply drag this onto Seneca. He's now by default up in the top left, but I have a drop down menu up here in the inspector now, so I can just go, no, this is trumpet 1, he needs to be over here, and now he moves to the right place. And so that way I can add this same one to everything else in the timeline, and all of a sudden everyone's in the right place, and I can just start going through person by person and setting these things up. So again, I wish I'd had these for the first, I don't know, 15 weeks before I figured them out, but there you go. So on and so forth. So once I get to this point, as you can see, it's fairly quick to get these things set. Now, as Astrid said, what we actually tend to do now is pre-process these video files and get them synced up first individually before we put them in the main timeline. So that's what I'd actually quite like to quickly go through, just to see how we get to that point. So let me come back to a clean Final Cut here, and in this pre-processing event over here, I've loaded in all the raw files. And let me see, here's Marielle, who plays trombone 2. This is her video as it was sent to me. And so this gives me some information about it. And so I can see, for instance, if I look just above the top of the viewer here, it's a 1080p clip and it's HD, but it's 30 frames a second, not 29.97. So that's something I'm going to need to address, because otherwise she's going to get out of sync by a frame every 33 1/3 seconds. So what I do to fix that and to get all this set up is I take the audio mix, which is up here in my list, and I select that, and then I control click on the trombone 2 video, go into the right click menu, and I synchronize these clips. And that brings up a menu like that. If I'm on automatic settings, it just will look like that. I go to custom settings, and what I want to do here is I want to use audio for synchronization. You can see that that's checked, which means that it'll analyze the audio for both the video clip and the audio clip, and it will try and line them up. And what I want to do specifically here, this is a 1080p clip, but what I want to do is I want to set this frame rate to 29.97. If I do that, when it synchronizes the audio and video, it will automatically set up a clip which is set up for 29.97, which is what my final video is going to be. So I do that and I click OK, and that'll think about it for a moment or two. And it pops up with a handy synchronized clip like this. So what I do from there is I create a new project in this event. And this one is going to be Ram Can trombone 2. It's a 1080p video. It's going to be at 29.97, so I can click OK. Gives me a new timeline there, and then I drag my synchronized clip just down into the timeline here. Okay. Now, if I play that, we'll find out whether or not it's actually in sync. But to make sure I can see that, I'm going to double click the synchronized clip once it's in a timeline, and that'll open it up and it'll show me the individual elements that are inside. So now you can see, hopefully, I don't know if you can see your own faces or not, but I've got that and it was obscuring the timeline. What you can now see, if I zoom in a little bit, if the computer will even do that. Okay, good. You can see that basically this audio is now starting slightly after the beginning of the video, but it seems to have done, judging by these waveforms, a reasonable job of lining them up. Let's play it back and see if it works. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. And so I'm just going to, just as a test, I'm going to go later in the clip and find out some other place where she's playing. And listen to that. And that's still in sync all the way to the end. So we know that what it's done is it's taken that and it's adjusted the frame rate accordingly to get those things in sync. And this is going to come out as a good 29.97 frames per second clip. Right, the final thing I want to do here before I go back into the main view for this video is I'm going to trim this video clip so it's exactly the same length as the audio. Okay, now to do that, I'm going to zoom in a little ways, and I'm just doing this by hitting Command and plus on the keyboard. Just zooms in some, and I'll keep the play bar back towards the front of here. And if I do that, you'll see there's this much space. It's about just under a second of extra video before this audio starts. So I'm just going to set up here, and I'm going to click B on the keyboard to go to the blade tool, find that spot with the playhead, and just make a cut right there. I can hit A on the keyboard to go back to regular arrow mode, take this and simply delete it. And now we've got something that's going to be much closer, but we can see it's just slightly off. These waveforms don't quite line up. But it still sounds pretty good. But what I do want to do, the interesting thing about working with video and audio in this way is that video is constrained by being cut at frame boundaries. So if it's 29.97 frames per second, the smallest increment of that video you can make a slice in is 1 frame. Now the audio, if we zoom in over here, you'll see it's about half a frame displaced. And to make sure everything lines up in the best way possible, when I put all these clips together, I actually want to have that start at the beginning of a frame. So simply what I'm going to do is, because it's after the start of that frame, I'm going to move this back to the beginning of the frame and then move it 1 frame over by clicking the period, the full stop period key on the keyboard, just over to there. And then once again, I'm going to just trim this video. So now everything lines up. It's strictly about a half a frame off, but that's too small of an amount for you to really notice as you look at it. And what I found by doing this a lot is that it's better to have the audio a half frame behind the video than in front, because the software, as you put all these videos together, it does tend to let the audio get a little bit ahead. So if you place it the video a little bit ahead of the audio, it's no bad thing. Okay, so that's what I do. I zoom into there and I make sure these start at exactly the same time. If I play it back, it's going to work fine. The difference isn't discernible, but it makes a big difference once you get 18 of them in a line. Okay. So to come out of here, I'm going to come up to the central part of the screen here where it says RanCanCan synchronized clip. I'm going to hit the go back in timeline history button. And this is now my synchronized clip with that bit of trimming already done. And then all I do from here is I will send this, this whole clip out to another complementary application that goes with Final Cut, which is called Compressor. And what that does is it will allow me to batch process videos and re-export them to different file formats and what have you. Very similar to the render window that Astrid showed you on Premiere Pro. Okay, the alternative here would be to share and save this as a master file. Anyway, that's the process that I go through for every single video in a project. all 18, however many instruments. Okay. So I make sure everything's synchronized. In that view where I see the audio and the video, if something's not synchronized, I can go through and I can fix it manually in the same way that Astrid showed you in Premiere Pro. And come to a position where I have these pre-processed clips where everything is lined up with the left boundary of the file lining up with the start of the audio, so everything's going to be in sync. And once we got those, it's something we can then just stack directly in a timeline for our main project. Okay, Astrid, is there anything different in that kind of a process that you need to do in Premiere, or is that not something you've been doing?
So I have been coming at frame problems in kind of a crazy way, especially if I don't really have a lot of time to be fixing the file. Essentially, like what I've done in the past has been taking a frame or two out towards the end to adjust the sync, which is not the greatest way to do things. But to deal with pre-processing, let me see if I can screen share again here. Oh, there is a question in the chat, by the way.
Oh, there is. Is Apple Motion, two questions. Okay, so Natalie says, is Apple Motion free? No, it's not. I think if you're paying these things full price, I think Final Cut is $299 US, and I believe Apple Motion is $50. But if you're a student, or you know a student, or basically if you've even ever met a student or a teacher or anything like that, you can go and get the Apple Pro Apps for Education bundle. You have to make an application to get it, but as far as I can tell, they don't check anything. So I've tried, all kinds of people have been and got this thing, and that bundle has Final Cut Pro, Motion, Compressor, and Logic Pro, and what's the one for syncing keyboards to MIDI? Mainstage, is that what it's called? Yeah. So, and those are all included in one bundle for $199. It's a great deal. It saves you, what's it going to be? Logic and Final Cut are both $300 each. So it saves you, you know, something like $550 all told, I think. Anyway, so check that out. It's the Apple, I'll write it in the chat so you can see it, but it's the Pro Apps for Education bundle. And yeah, if you just search that on Google, you'll find it easily enough. And yeah, you have to apply for it, but there's really no barrier for entry. You just say, yeah, sure, I'm a teacher or I'm a student, and they go, yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so I recommend that. And that, you know, if you do that, then yes, Apple Motion is free. Right. Fred's question: can you solo the trombone with the track to make double shorties in sync with the picture? I think I did that, but did I? Let me go back to a screen share real quick, and we can certainly do that. If I go inside the synchronized clip again, and I disable that audio. Is that what you meant, Fred? Yeah, okay, good. So yeah, by all means, check the original video and see how those things look. One of the things we have very often with these drum videos, if I find that in the list over here, is that Vinny will send me these things. Let me just drop this in a new. Let me just get it up here and play it back. He tends to do it with a click track already in it when he exports them. And And as you can probably see, his video is actually slightly out of sync with his audio because of the placement of his camera. I'm not sure quite of the specifics of his setup, but I think he's recording with a webcam that's attached to the computer by a long cable. And in order to get the full drum set in the picture, it's placed way across the room someplace. So there is a little lag in that. And what I've discovered, again, through trial and error mostly, is that if I get him synced up in the way I showed you with the trombone video, and then I take the audio track and I move it 4 frames late, move it to the right by 4 frames, then it lines up and it looks right as he plays. And so there's a certain degree of this all the way through. Oftentimes what any automatic syncing will tell you is in time and is synchronized will not match with what we see, because of delay in audio getting processed and making it through cables and things like that. So, there's a certain amount of doing this by eye as well, and just looking and checking on it and making sure it's right. But that's, that's a good question, because, we do want to make sure that everyone looks like they're playing at the right time. Because particularly if it's your instrument that you're looking at, or like the instrument that you play that you're looking at, you notice very quickly if it's not.
Great, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And also in particular, you can tell when people have made edits in their audio and not in their video. If they've done a take and they've made a mistake and they've gone back and fixed it, because sometimes the fingers will be in the wrong place, or all of a sudden they're holding the horn in the wrong hand or something like that. It's you see some amusing stuff going through these raw videos, as I'm sure Astrid will attest. Anyway, that's how I go through that pre-processing thing. I'll batch process all of those, and it takes a minute or two to synchronize and process and like check the sync of each individual instrument. So that's about 35-40 minutes work up front usually. And then it takes about half an hour to batch process those videos for my computer usually. So I've got about a 75-minute process ahead of getting to editing. But then when I get to editing things in the timeline, it makes it much quicker because it's already in sync and I don't have to worry about that stuff. So particularly when you're working on a deadline, because, the deadline for doing these typically hasn't changed every week. More or less, we always end up getting stuff on Wednesday if we're lucky for a Sunday night show, and usually Thursday or Friday or even Saturday morning sometimes. And so the more stuff you can do to get everything prepared and get out in a crunch, so there's some corners cut here and there, but other than that it tends to work. So good. So anything to add to that, Astrid? You're muted right now.
Here we go. Sorry about that. Let me pull up my file again. I guess I could talk a little bit about what a kind of more complete timeline, like how to get to a more complete timeline in terms of making cuts and
yeah, please go ahead, because I mean our process is basically the same, I think, at this stage. So so please have at it, and I'll mute for a second and leave you to it.
All right, so I'm gonna screen share again. Here we go. So this is a timeline that's more or less lined up. I just haven't made any cuts yet. Lately, instead of sticking to the grid, I've been switching it out for just a white screen, as Brian showed before. I need to move some things. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, adding a white screen, pretty simply, just go over here, go to color mat. That's all okay. Drag that over, click OK, name that white screen. And there it is, basically. You just drag that in instead of the grid. And just, oops, go over here and reset. There we go. Okay, that basically just kind of gives it a cleaner look. You don't really run the risk of there being, you know, potentially black lines around people if they're a little bit out of their grid space. Okay, so that's that. And yeah, basically what I would do going through this is, I think, Brian, you might do something a little bit different in terms of actually making cuts as you listen to you go through the piece. But typically, especially if it's a piece I don't really know, I'll go through it and listen and just kind of see who's playing. And then maybe get to, this one already has some, let me pull up a different one actually, sorry. Here, yeah, okay, so this has no cuts in it. So I get over to that similar point before where it's just drums. And then typically going through something for the first time, I wouldn't make any cuts, but I would rather just press M and leave a note about who is playing at that particular moment and just save that for later. And then go back and start to cut by essentially hitting, you could click over here for this or hit C and then Shift K will cut everything right there. All of the videos will be cut. And let's just get to the end of that phrase over here, around there. This is where the rest of the band comes in. So this is just, play that.
I actually have a question about that, Astrid.
Hmm.
Do you tend to lock your audio for the main audio track once it's in, or do you let it get cut? Because I prefer not to cut the audio, just to make sure that nothing gets messed up.
I have been typically letting it get cut since this process is fairly new to me. What I was doing before didn't involve making these big cuts.
Right.
But that's a good point. I should actually just go over here. I believe if I just hit this, actually. This way it's locked. And that way I can just cut right here without impacting it. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really been thinking about that too much. Yeah, the cut won't impact the sound of the audio, but it is good to not have a cut in the file just in case anything changes. I'll just go over to my selector and would typically, since this is just drums right here, would just go ahead and select. Perhaps there's a faster way to do this as well. Select everything above drums, since that's the lowest track, and just right click, go over to enable and unclick that, and that'll disable everything else. And then I have a preset for full screen that I would just drag over here. And I actually forgot to remove the previous attributes, which you have to do, and then drag that on. So that fits all right. This is kind of going off topic a little bit, but Brian, I actually have a question for you, if that's okay.
Okay, please.
So I noticed earlier that your codec settings were a little bit different from what I've been doing. Do you, could you talk a little bit about the codec default that you use?
I'm not certain that I can, because I think they're default just in the software.
That's what I was wondering, because the default over here is different. So I wasn't sure if it was just a software difference, but at any rate, it seems to create a fairly similar output.
Yeah, absolutely. The only difference I've got is in my compressor settings when I export the MP4 files of the pre-processed videos. I've got it set to that's set to an MPEG file format with I believe a 20,000 kbps bit rate.
Mm-hmm.
It exports as an MP4, so because the audio quality isn't a consideration, because we're using WAV audio for the master file. Mm-hmm. So apart from that, it's basically just a default MP4 set to 20 Mbps.
Mhm. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. I wasn't sure if that was just different defaults or.
Yeah, I mean, up
choice.
to more recently, since we prepared a bunch of things for TuneBand at Shapeshifter, that was it was literally just running default. So
cool. So yeah,
it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. So that's basically all I wanted to show for making cuts. Since this is a video that I have not, let me see if I can pull up something. I did not edit this video. Brian edited this for the for that edition of Virtual Wordland a couple weeks ago, but I made a couple cuts in here just to show what it would look like with multiple things disabled. Of course, I did not see this audio problem here. I will not do that in the future, cutting the audio. So yeah, it typically looks like this with everything enabled. It would look like that. We get to this point where all these are disabled. And yeah, I have a bunch of presets for just like all the various positions you could find yourself in. Of course, like there are going to be pretty much any combination of people you could imagine playing together at various points. So there's some kind of quirky grid options and some quirky positions that I like to use. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about that side of things.
Yeah, very cool. And this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is basically the process of doing these things. The process of making these videos each time breaks down into, I'm going to stop your screen share, Astrid, and go back into mine. It's thinking about it. Okay, there we go. If I close out of this and come back into RanCam. So think about loading for a second. Basically, the process of doing this breaks down into 3 stages. After this pre-processing and initially getting your timeline set up, I think of it in terms of being in 3 stages. I'm going to play through the music one time. And as Astrid was demonstrating, I'm going to really just spend some time to figure out who's playing when. And I'll make cuts in the video files at those points. So if the ensemble changes, so for instance, over here, this piece starts out with the full band. And just for this bar, it's just drums. So similarly, as Astrid just showed, we're gonna make a cut there because we know something's happening. And then basically the overall idea is to only show the people who are playing at the time. That has some people like to kind of time it out a little bit more. I see some other people doing videos like these, and they'll tend to, if the saxophones are playing a saxophone solo, just have the saxophone section on the screen for a period of time or something like that. But my thing with going into this was really that I'm in this band. So I kind of feel like myself and all my friends who play this music, you should see us if we're playing. And so it's partly selfish on my part and partly trying to keep the guys happy, guys and girls. And from that point of view, it has the happy side effect of doing it that way, of really emphasizing what's happening in the orchestration and in the arrangement. So, if it breaks down to a sectional, you can really see something build up in a way, because there's maybe a couple of the reeds and a couple of the trumpets and one of the trombones playing a section, and then some more people add in with another layer on top of the same thing, and that kind of idea. It tends to my mind, give it a more kind of musical approach than just going, Yeah, the saxes are playing here, and they're doing some stuff for a while. So let's just look at that. Because more often than not, maybe they're playing some intricate stuff, and that sax solo is super cool. But also, I know that Vince on the drums is playing something real interesting to back him up, or just the way that interweaves with the way the bass is playing, or something like that. It's going to be something that is actually worth paying attention to. And also, I know from a musician perspective that if I'm watching something like that, I'm always looking at the instrument I'm interested in. So, you know, if I'm really trying to figure out what it is that the bass player is doing, I want to see him as much as possible. And the chances are that he's a guy who's going to be playing all the time as well, pretty much. You know, if he's laying out, then sure, I don't really need to see him scratching his face or futzing with his music or whatever. But for the rest of the time, then it's really about, you know, just trying to show what's going on. So that's basically what I've been doing. And as you can see when you look at this timeline, that's what goes on. We get through this section, everybody's playing. We get to the next section, it's just Vince for that bar. We get back, it's the full band. It's just Vinny there again. Now we get to a subset of the band. It happens to be 12 people, so that fits well on the grid. And it's interesting, Astrid made a slightly different choice with how to line them up. But she made the cut at the same place, which is also one of the interesting variables about doing this and having a couple people, different people doing it. And particularly to begin with, I was kind of, it was my responsibility to like see what Astrid had done and, you know, make suggestions about how to do it in a different way. But now I really don't need to do that because she knows kind of what choices I'm looking to make. And so, you know, I'll by all means give it a second pair of eyes just to make sure there's nothing that looks weird, but generally she does a great job, so I just leave it be. So, you know, in terms of this, it just comes down to who's playing at different times. It comes down to the rhythm section at this point, and I'll just try to frame them position-wise in a way that makes sense for their instrument. With 5 people on the screen right here. You know, the drum set and the congas tend to be a little wider to look at than the other 3 instruments. So that's why they're framed that way. It's not really any more complicated or well thought out than that, because quite frankly, as one other of our sound engineers said at one point early in doing this process, you know, this is not sound mixing, this is emergency management. It's, you know, we're doing everything on such a time crunch and so quickly that it's really just kind of getting something that works and throwing it at the wall and seeing what sticks. And this is kind of how it's stuck. So what's the total edit time each week for this show? It depends how much music there is, but generally as a rule of thumb, I would say that it takes between 45 and 60 minutes per minute of music. Yeah, I typically, particularly when I'm working one of these on my own, you know, if Astrid's busy doing something else, happily gainfully employed elsewhere, because we, you know, we basically do this for free just to keep everything going and keep some music in front of some people and keep the profile of the organization up. There's a very small stipend for doing it, but it's, you know, we're not making a living. But generally, if I'm just working this on my own, between recording my parts, you know, doing that part of it and then editing everything together, I typically work about 40 hours a week on this. And it typically doesn't happen until, like, that's all crushed into 3 days. And then I work a similar amount outside of this between teaching and doing other video projects and practicing and dealing with everything else just to make a living, you know, because this is the community gig and, you know, and what have you. So, I mean, it takes a long time. And so that's why it's valuable when I've got somebody like Astrid who can muck in and help out. And right now I'm actually completely selfishly taking a break. Actually, this is my second week off I hadn't had a week off at all since we started. So this is the version of me when I've actually been sleeping and stuff. You don't want to see the regular one. It's not good. Anyway, so we've kind of covered a lot of stuff and we've looked at a bunch of different things. Is there any questions while we've got maybe a few more minutes? Because I know Zach is probably going to pop up in a minute and kick us off. Zach, is there any questions from the YouTube chat? Is anybody watching over there? I don't know if he's here. He's probably not paying attention. Probably put him to sleep again. Anyway, any questions from you guys? Now you've kind of seen inside the process a little bit. Any technical questions in terms of strictly just doing something? Please, type in the chat or raise your hands or say, no, we're bored to tears, like leave us alone or whatever. Anything? Yeah, Connie, please go ahead.
You guys do an amazing job, and this was like a really helpful overview, kind of like a little, like to look kind of inside the process. But I don't know, I'm thinking that possibly this may be like an idea just to throw out, kind of a precursor to like a series of step-by-step lessons in breaking it down from like kind of step one. Maybe
Sure.
like a series of workshops, and maybe even for like.
In actual fact, I'm way ahead of you. There's a YouTube series of that very thing coming.
Oh, okay.
I'm in the process of putting it together because there is definitely a lot to this. And so in the next few weeks, depending on how busy we are dealing with everything else, I'm gradually putting that together. That'll be Final Cut centric because that's what I use and it'll be based on this process, but I'll go through, not only some Final Cut basics in terms of the skills that you need, just, how to make those cuts at that point and how to trim something to the end and getting into your control keys and the settings you need to look out for when you're importing things for the first time and all that kind of stuff. You can say how, there's so many possible questions there and possible details that, it's really something. And as an itinerant YouTuber myself, I know it's a never-ending series of stuff that I could make. But again, spend 40 hours a week doing this and 40 hours a week doing that, and it's just finding the time sometimes. But gradually this will be coming together, and because I recognize like I say, I hadn't done any of this kind of thing before we started doing it. So I've learned an enormous amount, and in one sense, I have no idea if I'm doing it right in terms of a logistical and technical way that people who do this actually do it. But we've gotten to the point of having a process that seems to work and seems to get it done. And we're certainly a lot more efficient now with it than we were at the beginning. Certainly for myself, that's definitely true. Yeah. So, but yeah, there is some stuff that you've got to search things correctly to find some of these tutorials if you're already looking for stuff that exists. And we tend to think of it as being split screen band, but if you search for split screen choir or virtual choir on YouTube, you will find hundreds of videos about this. Literally hundreds. I went looking to see what was out there and see what it was, and that seems to be the oeuvre that people tend to think of doing this in. And by the way, there's some completely beautiful choir videos that I've seen done this way with really interesting animations and like huge kids choirs and stuff like that. I don't know if you've seen any of them, but it's kind of remarkable. Anyway, so that kind of cut your question off, but that's coming. That's, this is a lot. And I think it's something that rather than doing workshops over Zoom, even though that will be possible, as we've seen from the slowness of getting this going with the screen share, particularly once you've got a bunch of clips in a timeline, you know, I'm not sure it's the best way to do it. I think it's probably better to screen record doing it offline and present that in a recorded format so it's easier to refer to as well. So that's what I'll be doing. There's a new YouTube channel just for that coming soon. So cool. Anybody else?
There's one in the comments.
Sorry?
There's one in the comments.
Oh, yes, Natalie. Okay, how do you deal with a computer that's kind of slow in terms of processing power? My laptop is maxed out at 16 gigs of RAM. Okay, so the thing you need to deal with here is making sure that you've got proxies set up for your videos. Okay, now the place that you find that is in your import settings in Final Cut. And so if I come, let me see. Well, anywhere I can import stuff, really. If I come up to import up here in the file menu, you can just drag stuff into the browser there, but if you open up the import window, it gives you a lot more options in terms of what you're dealing with. And this window will pop up and give you some useful options. Now, what you'll see I've got set, the settings in particular are down here on the right side. So right now, this is the top thing here is the event in the library that I want to import these things to. It happens to be set to examples. That can be set to whatever you need it to be. Beyond that, what we're dealing with, under files, I have the option to copy it to library or leave the files in place. Now, if you copy it to the library, it will take wherever you've got it stored and it will make a copy in your Final Cut library, which can be useful, particularly if you're on the go, but also it can make your library get really big really quickly. You know, this is almost 30 weeks of virtual Birdland we're in. Right now, I'm running external storage totaling not quite 100 terabytes attached to my computer, and about, I would say, 65 terabytes of that is virtual Birdland. It's an incredible amount of files by the time you're dealing with, you know, if it's 5 songs and there's 18 people, that's 90 video files every week. They're all about a gigabyte. It adds up really quickly. It's insane the amount of files we've got going. So that's one thing. So what I prefer to do now is rather than copy to library, I leave files in place so they're only stored in one place. And so the Final Cut library knows where to go look for them. But if they're on an external drive, you've got to make sure you've got that external drive. Make sense? Right, beyond that, what we've got, I set up keywords from Finder tags and from folders. So I will drag folders of stuff into my event when I import them. And that means that if I close out of this for a second and go look through here, for instance, in pre-processing, if I open this folder, you can see that I've got it tagged that those are the rhythm section parts, those are the saxes, those are the trombones, and so on, because I dragged folders in there, so those things are tagged. Okay, let's go back to that media window. So that's what that means. In terms of analyze video, I go with balanced color, just so as they all come together, they all look kind of the same, which just makes it look a little nicer. And then after that, it's under transcode that it gets interesting. We have the option to create optimized media or create proxy media. Now, particularly for these kind of things, creating optimized media, what that does is it creates the highest possible quality version of a video based on your codec settings, okay? It would by default go to ProRes 422, which is an Apple codec. which means that a video that comes in that might be 1 gigabyte, if it's 7 or 8 minutes long, you transcode that to an optimized media version, it'll look as good as it can possibly look, but it'll probably be a 7 gig file. So it blows it way up, okay? And it will store that in your library. So it will clog up your library and it will take up a lot of space. If you don't need it, don't use it. If you've taken like the most beautiful landscape video and you want to really have that look gorgeous for some cinematic movie, that's when you're going to use optimized media. But for people sitting in their apartments playing their instruments, as long as it looks cool, like regular quality is totally fine. Make sense? But the important one is create proxy media. And if I check that, what that will do, I'm choosing H.264 as the codec, which is your standard kind of iTunes codec. So it's low quality, and I'm choosing a frame size of 50%, just so it crushes it way down. One of those videos that comes in at 750 megs or a gigabyte will end up being 25 megs at a proxy. It'll look fine just for editing purposes, but that's what lets your computer play it and deal with it, even if you've only got 16 gigs of RAM, because you're not clogging it up with having like 16 1 gig files trying to play. Make sense? So, for certain things, I will import that and have it make those. And so when you import your stuff into your library, you've just got to let it take the time to transcode those and create them. And they will save those in your library, but those are pretty small. So
do you know if Filmora has that feature, Brian?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if Filmora has that feature?
I don't know it well enough to say. It may well do, particularly in the Pro version. But it's definitely something. It's definitely something that's worth dealing with in Final Cut, particularly if you don't have so much RAM memory. I use it because I'm doing so many stack videos in a stack, and it keeps everything running fairly smoothly. But I've got 64 gigs of RAM in this iMac that I'm on right now, which is my main workhorse machine. And even if I don't put proxies on, that gets real slow sometimes. And particularly if I've got more than 18 videos or really long clips to start editing. So by the time I'm editing these things in the timeline, then you just set the timeline to view the proxies and it plays back much more easily. And then beyond that, for this kind of thing, because we're dealing with the audio separately, we don't need to deal with any of the analyze audio settings or anything down here. So you can just leave that be. But basically switching off create proxy media for different things is super useful. For making pre-processed files, I have a library for that, and I don't put proxies on there because I don't need them. I'm just doing one video at a time. But for when I've got lots of things in a timeline, proxies are definitely the key. So good. Stop that share again in a minute. Any other questions as we got going on with that? We're kind of winding down. I think we're probably close to time, aren't we, Zach?
There's no hard time limit, but it's, we're probably winding down.
Well, I'm boring myself to tears at this stage. So.
We did have someone on YouTube asking where in England you're from.
Yes, I'm from Cleethorpes, if they're still there watching, which is a small resort town on the East Coast. I lived in Leeds for many years, and my accent is not indicative of any of those things anymore because this is the diluted, watered down version of English that American people understand. So if I were to talk how I naturally talk, and it's not in my ears anymore because but for instance, when I called my dad on the phone back in England earlier on during the day, and if anyone would have been a fly on the wall for that conversation. So funny things, it was a story in Birdland actually years ago. I was playing with the Friday band, and chap from the city of Warrington, which is about 50 miles from where I used to live in Leeds, was in. And the band leader for that band liked to announce where everyone was from. So it was, oh, I'm from England too. And he told me, and we were chatting. And of course, I got his accent in my ear, and I went back there. And I went back to North England, and like the accent clicked back in. And we talked, we had a great chat for about 15 minutes. And afterwards, the band leader, the sub band leader who was working that day, comes to me, he says, look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be eavesdropping on you, but I'm really confused. It's like, why is that? He said, what language were you speaking? I said, no, that's English. That's what English sounds like. It's just that you're not used to it. we went local, and it was incomprehensible. So this is the accent right now is not indicative of how I really actually speak in, you know, my native accent, but this is the one where people understand a fair percentage of what it is I'm saying, rather than none of it, unless you happen to live within 10 miles of where I'm from.
Also the accent that fools Americans into thinking you have a necessarily extraordinarily high IQ.
I do as it goes, but that's separate. An issue.
Yeah, well,
but yeah, no, it makes people think I know what I'm talking about, so I get to do things like this.
Yeah, it keeps everyone calm and lets them think that you're in charge.
Yeah, and also really scares them when I get cross, because it gets terrifying.
I can imagine. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Astrid. This has been very enlightening. When you said how much time it is per minute of music, my jaw dropped and my heart stopped. But this has been really interesting, really enlightening. And just on behalf of Alja, thank you so much for sharing with us how you do this, and thank you so much for having done it for 31 weeks now. It's really been incredible, labor of love, and you guys rock.
Thank you. And
Thank you, guys.
You know, I'm just all big round of applause to Astrid, because without her at this stage, I'd be lost, because I can't keep up with it on my own, as I keep proving to myself. So thank you, Astrid.
Oh man, thank you for the opportunity. I've learned so much over the past few months.
Cool. And you know what you're doing already, so I don't know how that happens. I've just kind of cobbled it together, but there we go. So cool. Well, if we've got nothing else, it's probably time for Zach's typical end of the masterclass spiel, and then we'll.
I have an end of the masterclass spiel.
You don't still do your end of the masterclass spiel?
Well, I mean, I could.
I know it's been a minute since I've been on with the trumpet class, but
well, I could do the usual saying thank you to everyone and telling everyone to, you know, stay in touch with Alja, check out what we're doing. Go to afrolatinjazz.org, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and you know, now that you're here, you're part of the Alja family. We hope to see you again sometime. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
And in particular, the Emergency Artist Fund is still in operation.
Oh yes, it is. Wow.
And so you'll find details about that on afrolatinjazz.org. And you know, if you've dug this masterclass and you found something useful in it, and you've got a couple spare shekels kicking around, please go over there and donate, because it's just helping out artists like I'm supposed to be, except I sit here in front of the computer doing this stuff all the time now. And you know, all the guys in the band and just musicians in general and other people in the arts, you know, we're on hard times right now because there's no gigs apart from what we can cobble together in the park and stuff, because you can't play in these pandemic days. So yeah, that's just kind of the standard appeal. But you know, if you've got the means, then great. If you don't, then we totally get it. We're there too. So does that about sum it up, Zach?
That about sums it up. Yeah, the Artist Fund is still going. 100% of all donations go to supporting musicians and artists and arts adjacent people who are out of work in the New York area. And so far, hundreds of those folks have received some aid via the fund. So like Brian said, if you have an extra couple bucks, every penny helps. If you don't have it, these are trying times, and we understand. And we're just happy that you could be here with us. So yeah, thank you. And hopefully, you know, you don't make Brian cross and have to deal with his accent in anger.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Goodbye.
Cool. Right. Well,